Hi there, and welcome to the Creative Operations Podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Groom, and in this podcast, we'll be talking with creative operations leaders in all kinds of industries, from franchising to finance, from healthcare to hospitality and beyond. We'll be looking to uncover best practices and to see trends that are coming to help you keep your creative operations on brand and on budget at the same time. Enjoy. Hey, welcome everybody to this edition of the Creative Operations Podcast 2.0. I'm your host, Kevin Groom, and I'm really excited. Today we are here with Russ Perry. He's the CEO of Pickle. And like me, he's an admitted geek in the world of creative operations. So Russ, welcome.
Thank you. I mean, it's not every day you meet someone else who's dreaming of digital asset management or other areas of the space.
Yeah, I bore my wife to tears. So listen, why don't you give us a little background on Design Pickle, and then that'll sort of set the context for our conversation.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how far back you want to go, but I'll kind of start with why we existed. I'm the founder of the company. Started 2015, so we're getting a bit up there in age in terms of our company. But in a previous life, I ran agencies, did a lot of B2B marketing, and always was focused on the content, the branding, the creative, the ideas, the materials that brands needed. Failed at that completely. They were not really well-run agencies. 99% my fault on that one. I had great teams. I just didn't know what I was doing. And since then, after that, I launched into really just everyday consulting. I joke the unemployed entrepreneur is a consultant. So I was in that space and just doing my thing. And there was this weird gap of talent where I was unable to really get a consistent creative resource, that I could afford. It was like either hiring someone full-time, hiring an agency. My budget was really more like what you could find on a marketplace, but those were always very inconsistent in terms of quality and developing client relations. So Design Pickle was founded really to solve my own pickle, if you will, and that was consistent, quality, scalable, reliable creative output, and launched it with my clients. They loved it and really said, hey, there's probably a few more other people out there that could use this tool. And so we launched as a flat rate resource, and still today, that's how it is. It's one price depending on, how many different creative output types you need, whether it's just graphics or video or other things. And that's it. So it's like I always say, it's kind of like a fractional team member, but we have tons of software, tons of technology that makes it really visible. As a creative operations nerd, I also saw that it was hard to see what people were working on, who's working on what, how long things are taking. And so that's really the wrapper around what we do that makes it different, is that brands and clients love it because they can kind of see the full scope of what's going on in their world and manage it accordingly. So that's the very, very, very high level overview of what it is, why it was founded, and kind of the problems we solve.
That's super. That's super. So, let's dive into some of the issues that, we've seen. And like you, I spent a great deal of time in the agency world, running studios, running creative, thinking a lot about brand, and then running into, creative operations issues along the way. And sometimes they were very much of their moment. But some have remained themes no matter what. I'll give you an example. And, the first one goes back to your point about consistency. So I wanted to throw this question out to you. One of the things that we see at Pike & Nine, by machining the creative operations process, is that we eliminate something that I've seen kind of durably, which is just InDesign files, AI files. After a while, when you work with a studio team, sometimes you know exactly who produced them just by looking at the way they set them up. And there are these human, very individual, differences between the files. Sometimes it's a matter of an eighth of an inch, a 16th of an inch, and it's really not damaging in any way, but it's not perfectly consistent. Do you guys run into that these days?
So we try to fit into the mold of the clients, right? And we're dealing with all different kinds of sophisticated clients. Some clients don't even know what layers are and wouldn't even care about naming or organization conventions because they just need to print this thing. And, if it's a flattened JPEG, that's fine for them. And then other clients, we work with tons of agencies who have very nuanced ways of going about their structure and their needs. So I think for us, like the problem we try to solve is, well, what works for you? And then creating a relationship and a history that is not just one-on-one with the designer. Because the problem that we saw is what happens when that designer's sick, not available, they move on. You don't want to have to re-onboard and re-educate. And I found that the best way to do that is to have that history available for a new designer to come in and be able to take a look at the notes, the file. It's almost like I would say that there's no actual functionality that operates this way, but our platform kind of in a way is like online dating, where once you get matched, we try to match you. If that designer is no longer available, we try to bring someone in that's similar. And then we have all this metadata that's available. That's not available if you're, most often a new designer gets onboarded at a firm where they're freelancing and there's like, here's our Google Drive, here's our Dropbox, here's our brief, get to work, right? And they don't have any context of the conversations, the challenges, the brands. So we were able to compile all of that under one roof. And I think it creates, for whatever nuances that your team needs, it creates that ongoing consistency as the talent rotates. And that's where I found the biggest challenges would occur in any creative operations is, it's being a designer is not a forever lifetime thing for many people. And they move on, they start their own shops, they freelance, they do whatever. And how can you close that gap of I'm new and how much time does it take me to become proficient in your brand with your schema, with your structure? Heck, as an agency owner, I knew I did a really bad job onboarding creatives. It would be like, hey, we need this tomorrow, get it done. And then, then I would be frustrated why it wasn't done right. Yet I just met this person, a day ago or 2 days ago inside of it.
That's awesome. I definitely have share your pain, certainly felt the pain. One of the reasons we started Pike & Nine was as we looked for a way, especially in distributed brand environments, where the customer themselves, the actual franchisee, dealer, reseller, they actually don't really have much experience whatsoever with working with creatives of any kind. And so, they wouldn't even know that somebody had been properly onboarded. We're dealing at that level, right? And so, the notion of using a machine to do these kinds of things, as opposed to a human is where that was born. And so, it brings up for me this notion of a workflow that has a very, like you said, a dating kind of thing. I love that notion. When the two sides of the equation are both familiar with what dating's all about. But how does it work when that other side of the equation isn't quite familiar with the things like you and I would know as former agency folks?
Oh, well, it's a challenge, right?
Yeah.
I would say, Pike & Nine definitely is solving you guys are really focused on one part of the creative problem. And I would say for us, we're trying to solve a different part, which is actually the communication and the relationship. So when we look at how do you work with someone who isn't as familiar, I think a lot of the tools that we believe improve the creative process are things that we've really poured a lot of time and energy and engineering resources in, which is unified briefs, quality control, actually managing and looking at the relationship and doing things like sentiment analysis. So how many times have you been frustrated with a creative? And well, not maybe you or I, because it seems like we don't have a problem saying if we're frustrated or not, but we see a lot of clients who actually are really worried about feelings and don't want to give hard feedback. They're not, I went to design school. I grew up with critique, so I can handle it. So we actually look at our tooling as how do we level up everybody to the same playing field in terms of how the briefs are written, how they're composed, the data, the information, really like super not crazy stuff, right? Like I wish I was solving bigger problems to change humanity, but some of the most powerful features like built-in sizing in terms of what you want and the pixels and the size of that asset. Like that's a huge time saver for a less sophisticated client who's like, I don't know what the Facebook ad variant sizes are. Like I just need a Facebook ad. And we take that thinking out of it. So it's how do we like normalize like the inputs and make sure the inputs are as great for any experienced client. And we found that creates such a better output, right? Like, and for an unexperienced client who isn't thinking about the details, our process gets all the information required every single time. And then for an experienced client, what's really nice is that it's very repeatable. So as it's you can actually clone and copy and create stuff. And then the designers see all of the previous requests, all the previous conversations. So they actually have almost like a conversational relationship history that you wouldn't have if you're just working in email. And sometimes you don't even have if you're using project management software because those things are limited and very narrow to the permissions of what people can see.
Well, you brought up a bunch of my pet peeves, right? Like project management software. And we've used everything from Basecamp over the years and across different agencies to now Monday.com seems to be the flavor of the week. But I've always found that those things often, they don't improve communication in the way they promise to, or they introduce a different kind of ambiguity to them, let
me just brief on this for a second, because I have a very strong belief. The real problem with these software is that they're created with the business model only works. They only make money if they have millions and millions and millions and millions of users. So they have this like huge market share that they have to adopt to be successful and to be profitable. So you're really buying these very vanilla containers that you have to customize, and it only works as well as you customize it. And it's just not built for creativity, right?
Yeah.
It's just not. It's just not. It's out of the box. It takes a ton of work to get it where you need it to be.
I couldn't agree more. I watch folks working with Jira for 6 months, and then a new customer success head comes in, and we're on to the next one. All that work goes down the hill. So that makes really good sense. And another point I love. This was not a pet peeve. This to me is almost it's a little bit old school, but the notion of the brief. I'm a copywriter by trade, right? Not a designer. So I always sat at the kids' table, and whenever designers were all in the room, but a brief that really helped make sure that the creative wasn't simply creative; it was strategically sound. That to me has become an art I see, honored more in the breach than in the observant. So tell us a little bit more about that briefing process, and how does it really guide, focus, and inspire the creative? How does that all work?
Yeah, well, it definitely is an old school concept, right? You don't even just using that word, you're not going to connect with a lot of people. But I'll actually share a story that I had with our head of data science, and we're working on a lot of AI and machine learning models, and even the generative tools we're putting into our platform here soon. And he was like, Russ, it's all about signal. Is if the signal's clean, the result's going to be clean. If the data's clean, the output's going to be clean. And the key to a great product, and I kind of took this conversation a step forward to creativity, is an average designer can create incredible work with a great brief, with clear direction, a good brand, a good concept of what's going on. An experienced designer who receives vague details, not a lot of information, will seem like the worst designer ever because they might have the right skills, but what you expect, what you want is just not clear. So you go around and around and around, and then eventually you're like, this designer sucks. They don't understand me. And I don't like them. They're not good. But really the reality is it's all about that initial communication. And so when we're looking at a brief, it's more about, we focus a lot on production graphics, right? Like we're not doing big, Madison Avenue campaigns and TV spots and all this kind of stuff. It's like here's the creative I need right now for my sales and marketing efforts, and it's clear and it's like direct. And so we say, like, how can we ensure that we're collecting the right amount of information so the client feels guided, right, to govern any level of experience. They don't have to guess or wonder or like, am I putting enough in? And then the creative receives that. And I think it's probably one of the most powerful parts of our process. And because even when you look at a lot of other tools where you can hire remote workers or platforms or marketplaces, their brief process is a text field, maybe a few questions on, like what it is you're looking for, who's your audience, and then a big empty box that you just fill out and type what you want. And you could imagine, like, some people might put some time into it, other people won't. And it actually, many of those poor experiences when you're using other platforms are self-inflicted. Like you're just not giving enough information.
Yeah.
And so I think that's like, for anyone listening, whatever you're using, I always say, like, review the input. Like, what signal are you communicating? Are you communicating something that's clear, or are you expecting people to kind of guess? And if it's the latter, the experience is probably going to be a little bit more work to try to get it up to speed.
Got it. This is a little plug for an old colleague of mine back in my agency days, who runs a business called What's the Big Idea? His name's Steve Poppy, one of the best branding strategists I've ever had the pleasure to work with. And, his point about the brief was, it's not simply a matter of good questions. It's a matter of inspired answers to those questions that really, really do help guide a creative to a new idea that is on target, on strategy. And I think that's what you're talking about here. You don't get that from a big empty box. Right. The whole reason clients hire creatives is because they need them to ask just the right question, and then to actually help them arrive at the answer, not just, sit back and wait for the answer to arrive. That to me is a huge part of the value. I watched this in our agency days when Steve took over the briefing process. I was a creative then. I was, sort of in management, but I really was, a chief copywriter and spent most of my time as an ink-stained wretch. But I found my productivity as a writer soared when I had briefs from Steve. If I talked to a client directly and I came back with my mess and notes, it would take me 3 times as long to arrive at 3 times as many ideas that were 1/3 as good. And yet when I had the brief, fewer ideas got presented. Almost all of the ideas got considered seriously before some of them inevitably got left on the cutting room floor. And I wanted to ask you a question about that. I wanted to ask you about the cutting room floor as Design Pickle feels it, right? So do you guys have sort of a process for the number of comps that you present and then the ones that get left, or how does that work?
Oh my gosh, you're actually touching on something we're kind of in a huge legendary debate is how many concepts do you present, right?
Yeah.
And do you do one really great one? Do you do 2 or 3? And I think what we're running into is the traditional notion, and I experienced this when I was in the agency, is let's give options, right? Like, here's the one option we like, here's another one, here's another one. But what we're discovering as time becomes more of a commodity, as budgets are getting compressed, we're actually starting to see that backfire where creatives are feeling the pressure to deliver more and more and more. And not just, like this is driven by the markets, driven by how much more you need and what's being expected. And they're still adopting this mindset that I got to do a couple ideas, I got to do them a couple options. And we're actually starting to push back on that philosophically at Design Pickle to say, hey, we actually would rather you just do one really good one. And be less concerned about trying to cover the range and see, like, I'm not too sure of this. I'm going to do this one. I'm going to do this one, and then you have delivered kind of 3 average ones. Because we believe that, and trust me, we're not there yet. This is like unwinding, decades of professional training for some of our creatives. But we believe that a really good concept that's not what you want gets better feedback than 3 to 4 average concepts that actually would receive less feedback because you actually trust the designer less. You actually are like, hey, I don't know if they're even in the ballpark. Like I'm just not feeling it. I'm just not into it. And so this is like a real-time shift we're trying to start to make with our creatives. And I believe the way to do that, not to circle back on it, is we need a really strong brief. And we need real clear communication with what a client wants. Because if we can do that, then landing, we track revisions as one of our KPIs. And when a client has enough content in their brief, our revision rate is under 1. It's like 0.8 or something. So meaning we actually deliver things the first time without any feedback. It's good to go. It's ready to go. And they take it. Now, a lot of our clients have in-house creative teams, so they might take it and revise it and use it themselves. But we see that the creatives that are with the lowest revision rates are doing the fewest amount of initial comps. So it's actually working in their benefit from a metric standpoint. So, but again, it's unwinding what you've just been taught your whole career.
Sure. And it also sounds to me like clients are changing and evolving. They may be saying, it used to be, we knew we were going to leave 2 on the cutting room floor, and the client knew it too. And so they would feel cheated, right, if they didn't get the 3 so they could leave 2 behind. Nowadays, I think what we're seeing a lot, especially across the larger brands, has been, if we see that it's on strategy, we want to put it into test. And we want to let our marketplace tell us what's going on. And so you will see more concepts make their way to creative production than we used to see back in the day, which actually brings me to my last question, because I want to be considerate of your time and really appreciate the time you spent. But here's my last question. So the back and forth, right, that we often see, it's the cycle time back and forth between design and the client and whoever else it might be. It sounds to me like, at least at the creative level, you guys are starting to carve that out, so you don't really have the back and forth. Yeah. What happens when that doesn't, quite go as planned, and you've got multiple rounds of revision going back and forth? You guys sort of clip it the way we used to do back in the old days, like 2 rounds of revision and review, or do you just keep on going?
Yeah. So what are the value propositions we have? It's flat rate, as many requests as you can get, as many revisions as you can get. Our governor is timeline, right? So if you have 100 requests that need to get done next week, you're probably going to need to subscribe to more subscriptions, because that's how much time every day you get is depending on how many subscriptions.
I see. So it's like a pipe. Exactly. Buy the size of a pipe. I got it.
Exactly.
That's a really good answer.
Yeah, so we don't penalize for revisions. And I will say, though, it's something we do track, because sometimes you just have a client that's dealing with a lot of stakeholders, and there's a lot of opinions, and the revisions are welcome. They're not stressed out about it. They just know it's going to take a long time. But we do flag things that start to get into those excess revision runs, I think, in the high single digits, and you just go from there, because we do want to then intercept it. It comes back around full circle. Is the communication working? Because 9 times out of 10, Kevin, I'll tell you this, I get a customer success review escalated all the way to the CEO issue. And it's in my inbox. I am not happy with Design Pickle, which, believe it or not, we're not perfect. And I dig into the history 9 times out of 10. It has 0 to do with the skill of the designer, and it is all about the communication. So revisions are an indication for us. It's something we track. We're not always stressed about it, but it's a real good indicator when there is a breakdown in that communication. And if we can nip it in the bud, and we can just go right in there and we can level set and clear that communication, game on, and we're rolling. But sometimes we miss it, right? And then we get a client that cancels, and they're not happy, and you're just so bummed, because you're like, man, like if we could have just gotten clear on this one thing, you can see where it is, and it's never about how good they are at Illustrator, never about their templates in InDesign or whatever. It's always about communication.
I got it. So you know what? It reminds me of a piece I just saw on LinkedIn. Great designer piece where the designer said, "So AI is coming after the designers' jobs, but it all depends on having a brief that's clear and declarative and completely strategically on target. We're safe."
Exactly. Yeah. I'm actually trying to get the marketing team to do some comical ads on AI versus human, because it's fun, it's cute, and then you're like, okay, now I need to use this, and you're spending a ton of time getting it to where you need to be. And then you're like, man, I should just send this to a designer. This is not working.
That's right. And last point, and I know I said last point, but what you really remind me of, and is a really important point. In the early days, in the agency business, there was a big divide between creatives and suits, account people and creatives. And the creatives were sort of black Armani sweaters and all that, and the suits were seen as just business people. But here's the point I've taken away from this conversation: as you create something, I was actually thinking about back when we first founded Pike & Nine, but we turned into something different. I was thinking about an agency that used technology to empower itself and its clients. What we've really turned into is more like an enterprise class digital asset management system with templating to boot. What you guys are doing is creating that kind of agency on technology wheels, right? But the human key that I'm seeing as you describe the importance of the communication is that suit, that account manager, that person who understands your business need and helps you translate it into something that the creatives can run with. And it sounds to me like your creatives are running with it, which is cool. I mean, it's a great story. So congratulations on it. It's not too late, even though it's been a few years since 2015, to say congratulations. You guys are doing an awesome job. And thank you for joining us here. Hey, everybody, stay tuned for the next episode of the Creative Operations Podcast, where we'll be looking into digital asset management and how it plays with templates. So we'll be looking at that next, guys. Russ, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.